All right, hey everybody in Facebook Live. Welcome in Justin Vierra with the Vierra Group at Keller Williams Realty here. And we're doing an interview today. We're happy to be joined by Ryan Lundquist, who is a well-renowned appraiser in the Sacramento area. And we wanted to bring Ryan in to talk about well, first and foremost, answer some of the questions that we asked our clients about questions they had about value, what they wanted to ask an appraiser specifically about their home or their home's value. So we definitely wanted to get to that. But they also wanted to talk about some of the leading trends in the real estate market from the point of view of valuation and kind of go from there. So Ryan, welcome, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background on who you are and we'll go from there.
Sure thing. Real quick, my name is Ryan Lundquist. I'm an appraiser. I have a blog at sacramentoappraisalblog.com, and we're just here to talk shop. I don't want to bore you with all the details. And so let's just jump in.
Great. So we had a number of questions from clients. So our client Linda Fergus in Elk Grove wanted to know about how much is landscaping considered in an appraisal of a property. And she's coming from a place of thinking about adding some value, specifically a drip irrigation system, but maybe they're thinking about doing an overall landscape, and we can kind of approach it from there. And so how does landscape affect value, and what does it mean on an appraisal or for an appraisal's perspective?
So I'll say, should I be talking here or here? Does it matter?
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, so I'll toggle back between both.
Sure.
So it's first of all, there's no one specific quick answer as you're going to pick up, and so bear with me because in real estate appraisal and valuations, it's not just like, well, landscaping is going to add X amount to your property, because part of it depends on what. And so if you put something atrocious in your yard that it's going to detract every single buyer, then that's probably going to be a negative for value.
Sure.
My big thing is, are you in sync with the expectations of your market? And so if you're on par with everything in the neighborhood, then you're not going to have any disadvantage, and you wouldn't have any real advantage because you're doing exactly what buyers expect. Okay?
Right. Okay.
Now, there's a house on the market right now that had $200,000 worth of landscaping, and I can guarantee you that they're not getting anywhere close to that because they simply way overdid it. Even though it's majestic, I mean, it is incredible. I would love it personally. It would go south as soon as I bought it. But
I've seen that.
But they way overdid it, and so that's why I'd say there's value in the sense of if you don't have anything, you're going to lose value. But there's value in the sense of you got to do at least what the neighborhood has. But if you have some assets, built-in barbecues and covered patios, and you have something that looks like HGTV in that Home Depot backyard, then that's going to be really good. But in terms of what can you really get for your money, I find a lot of people spend very significant money. And if you spend $40,000 in your backyard, oftentimes buyers don't walk up and say, I would love to spend $40,000 more on this house right here.
Right.
And so there's not really that dollar for dollar thing, but if you need a drip system, then I would say do it. That's not a detriment, but how much do you need to spend? I mean, if it's some sort of $10,000 drip system, I would say time out. Maybe go the DIY route or get someone else to do it at a much cheaper price.
Okay, so if I hear what you're saying is, if I have maybe an average, if I'm starting with an average type landscaping relative to my neighborhood, and I'm maybe adding something for a couple $1,000s, I might not be adding as much value. But maybe if I understand who the buyer in the market might be and what they might want, then I have the opportunity to maybe add some value. But I can't also let that run away and put tens of thousands of dollars into landscaping and expect tens of thousands of dollars of value.
Yeah. And if it's something that can quickly die, it's probably going to have less value. And so what I'm lumping into landscaping too is nice concrete work and sitting areas. I mean, people love that stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, if it's just all plants or you have nothing but garden beds, then that's a very specific thing.
Yeah.
And so so don't overdo it for the neighborhood is my advice.
Right.
Don't be afraid to improve the backyard because, I mean, what sells a house, the kitchen and all that stuff, but really going in the backyard when people walk back there and think, I can live here and this is really nice. And on that note, I would say that the backyard tends to be more important for landscaping than the front yard. Okay. And so if you're going to put your money somewhere, I would suggest the backyard. Have the front look nice enough to get someone in the door, but have the back look, even nicer so where someone will want to make an offer.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, great. The next question we have is from Jeremy in West Sacramento. And his question is about, help me understand how comparable comps, so how comparables are pulled when I'm ready to sell. My home was built with nicer features like hardwood floors, Caesar stone, counters, etc. Does that mean I can get more per foot, maybe than average? Or
no, that's a good question. And Jeremy, so here's the thing. The proof of value is found in the market, okay? I'm assuming it's in West Sac. It sounds like you probably bought it in the last, 10 years or so based on the question. That's my guess. You probably paid a certain amount of upgrades, from the builder for Caesar stone, and builders have a way of itemizing upgrades. And you had a package, and maybe you paid $15,000 more than a different package. When it comes to the resale market, I guess I have good and bad news. So the good news is that you'll find value in the market. Find the most similar properties out there, and then that'll tell you what your property's worth, okay? And so you'll want to do your homework. You might not find anything exactly the same, but if you're looking through properties and then you're walking through open houses in the neighborhood, then and you see them selling at a certain point and they have very competitive upgrades, then that's a strong and compelling case. Those properties are comparable, okay?
Yeah.
The ones that don't have as many upgrades, if they're actually selling for less, then you know that, okay, the market's paying less for those properties. But here's, I think, maybe part of the bad news is that sometimes builders, what they charge on the front end, you don't necessarily see it in the resale market. And so sometimes it's like, here's a lot premium and it's an elevation premium. Your house is 1 foot above everything else. Yeah. And we're $25,000 more. And so a buyer might think that is fantastic. I want to, live in a castle. Like I'm going to be above everyone. But then the resale market comes along and says, what? There's a difference? And so they might not recognize that at all. And I find that sometimes that happens with upgrades where the resale market might look and go, we don't care about the difference between Caesar stone or quartz or granite. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think for compelling information and answers, we have to look to the comps, and let's let the comps speak to us about value rather than what someone paid a builder. Okay. That would be my advice. So,
follow-up question that I have to that is, what about when you buy in a newer community and let's say the builder is not done?
Yeah.
And maybe it's like I can think of a client in Roseville, and there's a lot of open land to build, and they're buying a home, and they plan to be there for a really long time, but maybe life changes and you have to sell, but the builder's still building.
Yeah.
And I've seen even in showing this client homes in the area where a seller will bring their property to market, and they're expecting that the price that the builder is building at, but they don't really understand the premium that we're willing to pay for something that's brand new, something that we get to pick out. Maybe you could speak a little bit about, how do you understand the difference between resale and brand new when the age of those is within a few years?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I guess here's my question to start us off. Would you pay more for a 2018 brand new Prius that's never been driven, or a 2016 Prius that has 30,000 miles?
Sure.
We on face value, maybe you're like, wow, these are within 2 years. They're practically the same.
Sure.
Yet when it comes to a vehicle, we know the answer that no way, I want that new car smell, and this has never been driven, it's mine, I know nothing's wrong with it, it still has a warranty.
Right.
The house does too, they tend to have 10 years, but I think buyers treat houses very similar, and so all of a sudden in that new subdivision, the owner, the seller wants to price according to the brand new homes, but let's look to for the proof of value in the resale market. Okay, what are homes that are just 2 years old selling for? Chances are probably less. The tricky part is that there's not homes sometimes to choose from, but you don't have that new home smell anymore.
Yeah.
You know, and even if you have landscaping, sometimes sellers will say, well, I spent $20,000 on rear landscaping and the builder's selling dirt in the backyard.
Yeah,
it might not even matter,
right?
Because there's being allured, you know, that tractor beam of new, where you say, "Wow, this is incredible, and I love it." And so there's that premium. So oftentimes, I mean, in the market, there's no set percent. Sometimes it's as little as 5%.
Okay, because that's what I was going to ask. Is there a gauge? Like, is it 5%? Is it 8%?
Well, sometimes it's 10%. Sometimes it's 5%.
Sure.
Sometimes people would say 20. That's really getting up there.
Sure.
I could see that a percentage that high with something that's definitely older. 10 or more years and brand new, but the thing is it goes back to the valuation principle, apples to apples. And if we have a brand new apple, what's that apple worth? Let's compare it to another brand new apple. Yeah, like that's what an appraiser is going to do. But I mean, an appraiser is going to do that because that's what the market's doing. Right. And so that's why I see it all the time. Hey, this brand new one's at $400, and we bought it $340 a few years ago. We have landscaping. We're just as good as this, but then we're like, well, but my Prius has 30,000 miles on it. It's not going to compete at the same level.
I think the other thing too is like I didn't get to pick the color. I didn't get to pick what tires or or floors or countertops.
Exactly. Or if the builder is controlling the market, they're like, hey, we will. If you buy this house, we'll offer you $10,000 in free options.
Sure.
If you pay this price,
right.
And so there's ways I think that they can sometimes get the price up there too, and the seller's not going to be offering the same things for that older property.
That's a good point. Because they might be willing to pay a higher price, and there might be an incentive to use different financing.
Preferred lender. If you use our lender, we will give you.
And that would definitely hamstring a resale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Howard in Midtown asks, how are home improvements estimated dollar-wise? So he just installed some new dual pane windows throughout the home for about $5,500. So, maybe you can. I think we kind of maybe address that a little bit in talking about landscaping. Yeah, it kind of sounds like where we're not usually using like these rules. It's more about where does that home, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more about where does that home fit in relative to condition and desirability in the market.
I think so. I mean, there's a specific upgrade. Clearly, it's worth something to have new dual pane windows.
Yeah, especially in Midtown. Really old homes.
More
and those old windows are tough to deal with.
More efficient. I will say though, in Midtown, you have a classic home, and if you put the cheapest windows in the world, then your house is going to look like
your neighbors will get you too.
Or the historical society will come along and give you a beat down.
They could.
But so it just because it's brand new, if it's out of sync with the architecture or style, then it's like yikes. Then a buyer would say, why did you do that? And so not all improvements are going to add to value, but I think there's a sense of where buyers will assign a total value. They'll look at everything in the house and say, here's where it fits in the market. I see totally remodeled units selling at $625. I see the fixers selling at $480. And properties with some upgrades are maybe $5 to $525 or whatever the numbers would be. I think buyers are savvy enough to sort of look at a property and assign a value to it. But I think there's also such a thing as giving it a value adjustment and looking at properties and being like, well, I mean, theoretically, if you had all these sales, they're all at the same level, and then there's the one with dual pane windows, well, then we know what the adjustment is. It's a fat chance of having that happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that's like, let's say we were in Natomas, and we had the model matches,
Yeah.
and somehow one had single pane windows and one had a $5,500 upgrade in dual pane windows. How would you approach that?
So, I mean, theoretically, these are like textbook real estate examples where this is how it works. And then the one with dual pane windows sold for $4,000 more, so the adjustment is $4,000. But oftentimes we look in the market and then we're like, wow. Sometimes you look and go, it looks like the market paid about the same.
Sure.
Sometimes a property, you might see a range of value though in the market where maybe properties are really selling between, say, $320 and $330. And so, because there's no such thing as a market only paying $321,356.
Right.
There's always a reasonable range of value.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think there's a little bit of leeway where, as appraisers, we would reconcile the value a little bit higher or a little bit lower depending on what's there. And so if your home has more assets, you have new windows, you just redid the kitchen, and then I can compare it to other homes with similar assets, but sometimes there's a little wiggle room where I'd go, gosh, it makes sense for the market to recognize this one has a little bit extra.
Got it.
For the value to be up there at that reasonable range.
Well, I really tried to pin you down there on that one.
I know. I will say this. Like sometimes we're like,
it's just hard, Yeah.
It is hard, but sometimes we're like, hey, how much are my new switch plates worth?
No,
And I just say the market's not that sensitive to where, like
it's so circumstantial too. It's like, was it competitive on that one, or was it, maybe it was in a little, anomaly in the market where it's somehow less competitive, and that can affect things. There's so many variables, I guess, to say.
Well, and we can't,
to put it better.
We can't like so fine tune it and be like, well, my tiles are 10-inch instead of 8-inch. What does that do for me? And I'm like, well, probably nothing. So the market isn't that hypersensitive.
Yeah.
So
that makes me think about why it's really responsible to give advice in a range. And then talk about strategy after that, because it is so variable and subjective, not only to what we're talking about, but when we're talking about it.
Absolutely. Okay, can I know I'm kind of going on a tangent, but you guys all know Zillow, right? So
I've heard about that.
Yeah, we heard that. So Zillow had an article last year about how painting your bathroom a certain color of blue would
I remember this one.
$5,500 in value to your house. And I read the article and I thought, this is a blog post. So I wrote a post about why that wasn't accurate. And because it doesn't make sense that you can go down to Home Depot and buy a gallon of paint for $30 or $40 and convert that to $5,500. I mean, otherwise, I think we would all be painting everything that color and instant value. And so just like, we like to think that value is so easy like that.
Sure.
But it's really not. It's complicated. There's so many moving parts.
I think if you hadn't painted your bathroom in a long time, that's good motivation to paint your bathroom. But I agree, the 55, I don't know. Yeah.
Seems a little steep.
Okay. So our last question comes from Sarah in Roseville, and she wanted to know what general property values were going for in Roseville near the Galleria Mall. She lives in the Diamond Oaks area. And so I'm not going to ask you to get that's so specific, but we did want to acknowledge Sarah's question. And Sarah, I will be sure to follow up with you in the next day or two and get you a personalized estimate of value so that you can have, and I can take the time to answer that question because it is so specific, but we're really grateful that you asked the question, and I'll be sure to follow up with you on that. And that goes for anyone else if they have a really specific question about their personal property. Just leave a comment in the feed here, and I'll be sure to follow up with you. Or you're welcome to just message us directly, or find our email and send us that information, and we will follow up with you. So I think those are all of those are sort of the top questions that we had. So thank you to all of our clients that took the time to send us their feedback in anticipation of Ryan coming and answering these questions. We wanted to sort of segue into talking about some trends that we see. Did you have something to add? Really, did I cut you off at all there?
No. I think I keep interjecting.
Okay, great, good. So we want to kind of transition into what are the trends not only that we're seeing on sort of from my perspective as an agent representing buyers and sellers, but also kind of on the back end almost, Ryan, as an appraiser. And so one of the things that comes up so often in my travels, especially working in the city core here, and I actually happen to be an owner of this type of property, are single-family properties with what is called an ADU, or accessory dwelling unit, right? And so these are homes that are not technically income properties, like technically a duplex, triplex, fourplex, but these are single-family homes. Maybe the zoning is not quite R1, but they have a finished garage. They have a finished basement, or I think those are the main ones. Is that right?
It could be an accessory dwelling. It could be attached to the house.
Sure.
It could be a converted garage or basement, but something it has.
So I think it's kind of something like that.
Yeah, it has to have a kitchen, bathroom, and sleeping area.
Okay.
To be considered an accessory dwelling. Otherwise, we would call it something else. But it's got to have those three things to be formally classified as such.
Okay, so it needs to be. So it has to be kind of a fully equipped space, so to say. And so what if it's just like a converted garage? Would you call that a room even, or would that just be a converted garage?
Well, it depends on what it is. Like, there's a lot of stuff out there that's converted without permits.
Okay.
And I think the permits are a big issue, like, because I saw something recently that was an accessory dwelling, and it was sold as such, but it turns out that it was actually only able to be permitted. It was only permitted as a home office.
Okay.
Oops.
Got it.
So I will say zoning and permits matter greatly.
Okay.
Because is it a legitimate, accessory dwelling, or is it a legal garage, conversion? Like, we always ask those questions, but an accessory dwelling could easily be, a converted garage. You might get more value. I mean, you probably will by having that rental income from that conversion. So
the question is, I guess, what's the difference in value if I have a home with an accessory dwelling unit versus a home without? Is there a particular limit, or is this another case where we're just kind of looking at as many units with accessory dwelling, or is a combination of the two?
Yeah, it's really tricky to value them, and I know you know that too.
Yes, I own them.
So I think sometimes first when someone builds an accessory dwelling, it can be very expensive. Okay. I know in California, in recent laws have sort of relaxed standards to make them easier to build.
Sure.
That doesn't mean they're not still expensive to build. And so sometimes owners will say, I spent $150,000 on this, so my house is worth $150,000 more. Say, well, okay, but let's look to the market for examples. And so ideally what we want to find are examples of other single-family homes with an accessory dwelling, because that tells us what it's worth. We're not guessing. We're not saying, well, here's what it costs, because here are some examples of what buyers have been willing to pay. Part of it comes down to, though, too, is quality. I mean, you have some units that are like, wow, that looks like a tough shed, and you have some bro living in the backyard. Like, that's not really high quality.
Yeah.
Right? That's a technical term.
Yeah, bro. Yeah.
Right?
I know what you mean that.
Yeah. But, and so it comes down to quality, but it comes down to rent also, because if you have a unit that's going to be rented at $1,200 versus something that's more rinky-dink that can really only command $600, we can see there that if I compare these two properties, it's really not the apples to apples dynamic. So I think some of it comes down to the quality and even what did it cost to build, but what are examples of them reselling in the market, but also like, how much rental income can it really generate, and then what's a reasonable amount that someone would pay right now for the property?
I think the rental unit is an interesting component because I see a lot of people interested in maybe getting into a better, more desirable neighborhood, and then that ADU with that income helps them not only qualify for more, or maybe they could have done it, but feel more confident in their finances with having that income stream.
Oh, yeah. No, it's huge. And I mean, it's ideal to buy a property that already has one, because like many things in real estate, it's probably going to cost more to build, and then it's going to pay for itself over time, but it probably won't pay for itself in one instant. And so Yeah, if you can buy one and then you have a place for an aging parent, or you have, I know a friend who does an Airbnb,
Right.
and I mean, he's getting money every single month, and that's fantastic. I mean, what an ideal scenario.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, they're not always easy to value.
Are there particular limits on what an ADU can contribute to value?
No. See, because the proof of value is found in the market, and an appraiser has to support the value that he or she says exists. And so it's just all about bringing data together and supporting that. And so if the market we're really looking at the market, my idea might be, wow, this is going to bring 20% more in value, but if I'm looking at the market in all these different ways, and I'm going, well, it looks like this is worth maybe $50,000 or 10% more, or whatever the metric is.
Sure.
I've got to pay attention to that because the market's speaking, not my own ideas. But there isn't a limit. I'll say this though. When someone is buying a single-family home with an accessory dwelling, we've got to realize that the front house matters. Okay.
Totally.
They are 100% buying the front house, and then whatever the other thing is, it's accessory to the value.
Okay.
And so sometimes I think what we're doing with accessory units is that we put that we like hype up the accessory dwelling so much, but we got to realize that it's accessory to the value.
Right.
And so
you mean like if in the area you only found a couple comps that had accessory dwelling units, but one of them was $650 because the main house was much more desirable than maybe you had another one that was at like $550. Is that kind of what you're speaking about?
Yeah, I think so. Like there was one. Imagine you're in the country, and there's this 3,000 square foot house, and then there's a tiny little accessory unit. Someone's buying that house. They're buying the property for the 3,000 square foot house, not the tiny.
The other thing's a bonus. Yeah.
It's even true in Midtown or really anywhere in town that we can't forget to look at it that way. That the main thing is the main house, and there's a reason why it's called accessory. Also, it just reminds us for value anyway, and so it's definitely going to make a difference in the value, but. Let's not expect too much. Like sometimes if a seller might say, well, it rents for $1,000 a month, and then that's $12,000 a year. You're going to have this home for a 30-year mortgage, so that's what, $360,000.
Yeah.
So this is worth $360 more. But
right.
I think buyers would look and go, what are these other units selling for? And what if I'm only in the house for 7 years?
Sure.
So if a buyer's only in a house for 7 years, then they're going to collect what, $80,000? Like, are they going to pay $175 more for it?
Right.
You know what I'm
and
saying?
I think what I see is, well, what could I pay? What else could I get for that price too?
Yeah.
So maybe I don't really, if all things are the same, maybe I don't want it or need it, and I would, for that same price, I might buy something a little bit higher condition or better location.
Yeah, because then if you're going to pay $800,000 for this, you would ask the question, what could I get for $800,000? And that's totally logical. I think sometimes in real estate we get so lost in the upgrades and stuff, but what does logic say? Because buyers are logical most of the time. So.
Yeah,
or not.
Yeah, I think I would say emotional, and then sort of squaring it up with logic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Investors may be more logical, although sometimes not lately, though.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit. Maybe that's a good segue into trophy properties. Because that's another trend right now, are some of these big sales on trophy properties, and I agree. Working with coming out of the multifamily and property management world in my background, and then working with investors that have long-term buy and hold plans. But then over time, maybe getting to move up into those trophy properties, and then you see much more logic in sort of their early investments, and then a little bit more emotion in that trophy property. And I think we were talking off camera a little bit about some of those trophy properties, and maybe you could just give us a few words about some of that experience lately. So
first I'll say, rents are up in Sacramento this year by 8.5%, and I think that an investor said it perfectly recently, that Sacramento's worst kept secret is that we have rising rents.
Sure.
Because I think the market started to notice, the nation started to notice, the Bay Area is starting to notice, and so I see 2 to 4 unit, a lot of pressure to increase in value.
Yeah.
And so you see this increase going on, especially in Midtown for so many other reasons. But along with that, I'm starting to see these outlier properties, and where I go, wow, that fourplex sold in Curtis Park for $850, or there was a triplex in Midtown that sold for $1.8.
Sure.
And thinking, what? Like nothing, no 2 to 4 unit property ever on MLS has sold for that much. And so it's interesting to see, and in some senses I think the market looks at that and goes, I can't afford anything. But I would say no. Those are like the trophies, those are the outliers.
Right.
But I think it also maybe just reminds us that maybe, you know, rents are making a difference, and you know, maybe the temperature of the market in that regard. But still, I'd say
I think the temperature of other markets, you know, plays a factor too. You know, you might feel like, you know, you've done well in some other investments, and then you have that opportunity to have a trophy property, which is a really big accomplishment, I think, over a long period of time of not only just working hard, but, you know, investing your money well.
Yeah.
And you know, getting that opportunity.
For sure. And I think sometimes people need to do a 1031 exchange. They need to park their money somewhere. And if they're in the Bay Area, they might go in Sacramento and be like, wow, I don't mind paying more. I have to park it.
Yeah.
So sometimes we see a high sale and we think that it's a market when it's actually it's more someone's individual circumstance. And I'm not saying that's what happened with these particular ones I mentioned, but
sure.
I think there's always a story to them, and I wouldn't blindly just say that now every triplex in Midtown is worth 1.8, because it's really not true.
I think that's one of the big things that we've been trying to convey to our clients in the last few sort of segments or messages, is just being really careful about applying overgeneralized information, you know, across, especially really specific scenarios, but, you know, just to kind of, you're just being careful about how you apply generalized information like that.
Well, it's true. And can I mention something?
Sure.
I'm never short on words, guys. I hope that I'm not annoying you. I hope we're having a fun conversation.
Yeah.
I guess there is no dislike button on Facebook, so sorry. But so I've noticed one of the most general things that we say in our market right now is that Bay Area buyers are dominating.
Sure.
You know, and I think that in some senses it recognizes that Bay Area buyers are a force in our market. Okay, they're
definitely there.
They're definitely there, but I think that when we look at stats also, we have to balance it and say 15% of all sales last year were cash in the whole region. Okay, that number was 30% when investors were really dominating the market 5 years ago. And
Absolutely.
So when we say that Bay Area cash is dominating, we don't have a market that's dominated by cash right now.
No.
Now, investors, certainly they could be using conventional financing, but I think that when we also look and go, wow, almost 20% of all sales in the region were FHA last year, that tells us that 1 in 5 sales were first-time home buyers. And so we look at those stats and go, well, okay, so maybe we need to reassess the narrative that Bay Area is dominating absolutely everything, because sometimes when we say that, then we think there's no fighting chance for locals to get into contract, when I think that we need to respect the market of the Bay Area, but at the same time, let's not think that they're everything though either.
Correct.
So, you know what I'm saying? So.
I do. I find that you know, I've had quite a few Bay Area or out of town buyers in the last 6 to 8 months, and I think some of them, most of them, have the same struggles that local buyers have. It can just be the time that they're in the market. It can be the specific neighborhood or local market that they're competing in. And certainly price is a big factor. I know that we've talked before about, you know, inventory isn't the same in all price ranges, and so that makes a big difference too. So no, I totally agree. So let's see. I did want to talk about pools, because I feel like pools have been coming up. Yeah. And you know, I guess spring's around the corner too, and so we'll have more pool conversations with summer and spring, and but I find it's always an interesting conversation. We don't have a ton of pools here, like Midtown, Esac, Land Park. I mean, you have a couple here and there, but it does come up, especially for, you know, if I'm working on referral in Roseville or Elk Grove or I know El Dorado Hills is a big pool area, and so I just thought it would be a good opportunity to I know that's a common question, like how pools affect value.
Sure. So pools are one of those examples where they're so expensive to build.
Sure.
When it could be brand new and the resale market shows up and they're going to be like, look, we're going to realize the value of this pool and using it over the next decade or two, but we're not paying the full amount in this one instant. And so in some markets, pools are a really big deal for marketability, and where sometimes, especially on the high end, when you look at the sales and you're like, wow, about 3/4 of these properties literally have a built-in pool. So it's a very, very big deal for marketability to have that pool. But in other areas, Del Paso Heights, if I look over the past 9 years of sales, 0.4% of properties have a pool.
Okay, so it means very little there.
It's almost the same in Midtown, downtown, just because of the lot sizes.
Right.
I mean, you can't put a pool, you know?
Yeah.
So some markets might expect a pool because of the price range or the neighborhood. In other markets, it's just not common and not a big deal.
I guess it's bonus if you like it.
Yeah, and in some markets, say like on the lower end of the price spectrum, it might be a really big deal to have that, $100 extra a month to clean the pool.
Right.
And so, or if it's a neighborhood that's it's an investor neighborhood, then that might be a liability because you're gonna, for insurance, and then also you're losing $100 in rent each month, and so. We have to look at it that way, where in terms of value, and so. But yeah, I mean, in a lot of neighborhoods, pool could be anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 in value, but there's no like one number. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Sometimes I look and go, well, it doesn't really look like the market's paying much.
Right. Right.
So
okay. I had another thing that I see regularly, but I think maybe we've kind of touched on it, so maybe I don't know. So. I see a lot more of these like ductless air conditioning heat and air units, and so maybe it's not specific about value, but when you like in your field or in your experience, when you have like these different applications, like when they first come on, can you remember? Like I think that it's probably been about 5 years where they were maybe like kind of first being introduced on a more regular basis. To now, I feel like I see them pretty often, and even new construction, they defer to these ductless systems in like infill settings, for example. And so, how does that process work for you when something is like just being introduced to the market, and then maybe it becomes more commonplace over time? And how does that relate to value and in an appraisal?
Yeah, well, it's tricky when something's brand new because then it's untested and you don't really know, and to be fair. And so I think, time will tell how the market will respond, and we just have to listen to the market. And so if something's brand new and it was listed for sale, I would be talking to the agent, hey, what kind of feedback did you get on this, and how did this sway value? The ductless systems, are you talking about just on the wall, like the wall units, everything comes out?
Yeah, like kind of like it's sort of generically referred to as like a European like heat and air. But you even see them, like you see them in restaurants now, and they can even be mounted in the ceiling. They're usually, you see them mounted on a wall, and then they have a condenser, but there's no ducting to sort of radiate the heat or the air so it's not like central, but it can be as effective, or it can also work in unique sort of buildings or structural systems and what have you.
I mean, it seems like sometimes I see those systems and there's always a reason why they're there.
Yes.
Sometimes in a upstairs, maybe the ducting isn't working right and they just need to stick one in there because that's what's going to work.
Extra,
so it's almost like in my experience when I see them, it's usually because the central system was having issues or something. And so I always listen for the bigger story, like, okay, what's going on here? The system's different here. But I think part of it's just quality too. Like if something is very inexpensive, then it may not be something that buyers are going to really pay a lot for. And if it's not as efficient as a central system, then that could be an issue for value. So, but if a house has absolutely everything, and then there's one room that is not being getting really good air,
It maybe has like a lot of exposure, or it's upstairs versus downstairs.
Like I wouldn't overthink it and say that this is the most detrimental thing in the world. But if a house only has like some rinky-dink, $300 unit of some sort, then I would be like, what's going on? That's probably not a good thing. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. I think those are all of sort of my trends and then questions from clients. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to kind of add to the conversation?
Gosh, I feel like I interjected a lot and got some stuff in there. So if anyone had questions, you can ask away. But otherwise, I mean, I think right now, I'd really caution sellers about overpricing.
Yeah,
we've had sensational real estate headlines for 6 years in a row. And we hear things like the Bay Area is dominating and values are crazy. People are willing to pay anything, but it's not true. And so I think in some senses, buyers are more informed than ever about properties and about value. And so I think that buyers are very finicky about price, even though the market is hot. Now, there's instances where buyers will you'll see properties get way bid up.
Yeah.
But I think sellers see that one instance and think that's going to be me. And so I call it pricing for the unicorn.
Yeah.
And so sellers, they look at that one unicorn and think, I'm going to attract that one mythical buyer that's going to, for some reason, pay 10% more than everyone else in the market.
Yeah.
This buyer is going to come from the Bay Area. They're going to totally ignore all sales, listings, and pendings that are lower, and they're going to pay, my house is so special that they'll pay 10% more. And I would just really say to sellers, you got to be realistic in this market and to price for the market that actually exists here rather than the unicorn buyer. Okay? So seriously, that is a huge issue. I logged into MLS yesterday, and there are about 100 price reductions.
Right.
Our market's heating up right now, okay? Because that's what it normally does in the spring. There's more listings hitting the market. But to have 100 price reductions in one day, that tells me that there are at least 100 properties that are overpriced, and there's probably more. And they've got to find the market, find the reasonable level, and they could have easily done that in the first place by looking at the sales and by looking at other pendings and being realistic rather than overly subjective.
And 100 price reductions in one day, that could be close to 10% of the market right now with limited inventory.
It could be a good chunk. When the market really gets dull in the fall, some years it could be up to 400. But this is, it's nothing. It's not like a warning sign in the market. No. The level, but it's a reminder for me. Like I've seen that number tick up a little bit recently. Then I'm like, hey,
pushing the envelope.
Buyers aren't willing to pay. We don't have a market where buyers are willing to pay anything. Like in early 2013. We had the most aggressive market. I would look back, or now I can call it like the Bitcoin market, right? Where we just had these insane values were just going up. I think over the course of 1 year, the median price literally rose 35 to 40% between
heavy investor market there too.
Heavy. Yeah. But right now the market it has that feeling. It feels like a Bitcoin market, although Bitcoin,
but the value isn't that steep.
Yeah, and so there's such a thing as where we can have a market that feels more aggressive than actual value increases. And I'd say on that note, the bottom of the market in terms of prices and entry level, whatever the entry level price is in a neighborhood in East Sac or Midtown, there's a lot more pressure at that price point compared to the very top of the market. And so I think we really have to recognize that the market's not the same at every price level. And sellers, I think the only thing that they see is Bay Area and
the headline.
They see the headline, but you got to price according to your market wherever it is. And so that would be like
the thing I hear from my clients that are looking to buy homes is very little speculation about obviously they want to buy a home that's going to appreciate, but they're not counting on it in terms of their decision. So for me, that means there's very little speculation in the market. And as motivated or emotionally charged as they might be to make their move, whether they're coming from the Bay Area or they're moving up or buying their first home, they're just paying such close attention to how much money am I parting with, how much is going to be left over, what's the future of my finances once I've bought this home, planning to keep the home long term. All, I think, really, really healthy for the market and overall, but I think speaks to the point about they're not just going to pay any price just to buy a house. So it has to make sense. And everyone's spending so much time online self-educating about neighborhoods, about who they're going to work with, and what the house looks like in that price range before they even get really serious about looking at homes and writing offers. So I think that kind of goes along with what you're saying too.
I think you're right on. 100% price sensitivity is what I would say. And it seems like in 2009, over 70% of all sales were foreclosures. Sure. It was a gnarly, dark time in real estate. But you had all these properties that eventually, so many of them were bought by investors and rehabbed. And what it did is it created a market where I think it's in the psyche of buyers, and maybe with the advent of HGTV also, but where we expect a better housing stock. And so, granite used to be like all the rage in 2005. It's like builders would charge crazy amounts, but right now it's like you walk in and you're like, well, where are the solid surface counters? There's almost like this expectation. So when it comes to inventory and price sensitivity, I think buyers have a stronger expectation for a better housing stock. And so properties that are in really good condition can fetch a premium. They still have to be priced right, but there's a lot of demand for that. And so I see properties that are in adverse locations and that properties that are not upgraded where, anything will sell if it's priced right, but I think that there's lesser demand there, and so sometimes when a property has something adverse in today's market, even though inventory is low, buyers will look and go, I think I'll wait and hold out, even though there's a housing shortage. And so it's this interesting thing where buyers are at. They're paying attention to price, but they're really paying attention to quality and condition.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. All right, great. Well, this was really, really productive, and I really appreciate all your time. If anyone has any follow-up questions, property values, just questions for us around the conversations that we have, feel free to leave a comment, send us an email, smoke signal, anything that works. I'm so grateful for all your time, Ryan. It's a pleasure, and hopefully maybe we can do it again later in the year and maybe just kind of reflect on 2018 and
absolutely
and how things have changed in our conversation.
Thank you.
Great.
You so much.
Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.